Deflation, why experts say it is unavoidable. I'm going to explain this to you in 3 steps. Step number 1, let's discuss how money actually gets into the economy. It starts up here with deficit spending, the government, the central bank, but we'll start right here in the private sector with banks. The loans go out to individuals, and that's how money gets into the economy, is actually through debt. So this person takes out a loan from the bank, they take out that money to buy a car, that money goes to the car dealer, he puts the money back into the bank, and that money gets lent out again to another person who buys XYZ product, good, or service. The things that we really want to pay attention to are how much money is actually in the system. So how much credit is going out into the economy, how much debt is being taken on by the consumers, and the velocity of that money, which is how fast is that money going from this person to that person to that person to that person, and then back into the bank and then back out. That is the velocity of money, and that is extremely important. One key takeaway that you have to remember is one person's spending is another person's income. Step number 2 is the deflationist argument. You can really break it down into 2 categories. 1, debt, and 2, demographics. So consumer debt, right now in 2019, it's at all-time highs. I've seen some charts that say that it's not, but those are charts that do a debt to GDP, and that is, I call it fake news. I don't think those charts are accurate at all, but that's a completely separate video. We've got credit card debt as at all-time highs, and we'll put up this chart right now. And the credit card debt is completely staggering. Also, some anecdotal evidence is you'll notice that credit card rates right now are extremely high, even though interest rates are very, very low. So if credit card rates are high and interest rates are extremely low, what would cause that? Why would there be a big discrepancy there? Why wouldn't interest rates go down like other interest rates? Well, the reason is because credit card interest rates are not only tied to the overall interest rate, but they're also tied to defaults. So you can have a scenario, which we have right now, and again, this is anecdotal evidence, but if I'm just putting 2 and 2 together, it would lead one to believe that since credit card interest rates are so high, that means that credit card delinquencies or non-payment are extremely high right now. Another category is student debt. We'll throw up a chart to look at that. This is something that I really want to highlight. So once you have student debt, it's something that is with you for life, unless we get one of these politicians in here that does some sort of debt jubilee. Again, another video. Auto loans, and the one thing I want to point out about auto loans is that the term on the loans is getting longer and longer. So what they're doing is they're decreasing the monthly payments by extending the term of the loan out from 5 years to 6 years to 7 years. Now I think there's even some 8-year auto loans. And the big problem with that is because people will get upside down on these loans, and in order to get a new car or to get rid of that car if they can't afford it anymore, they'd actually have to pull money out of their pocket. This is all happening when interest rates are at historic lows. And auto loans aren't the only thing that they're extending out to try to make more affordable to get more sales. They're doing the exact same thing with mortgages, where now you can get a 50-year mortgage. And deflationists will argue the reason this is so important is because the amount of money in the system is generated by debt. Also, the velocity has a lot to do with the amount of debt that's being injected into the system. If the consumer is completely tapped out and they've stretched their income as far as they can possibly stretch it to buy more goods and services, at a certain point they just can't do it anymore. You can't stretch out that finite amount of income. Therefore, no more debt can be taken on. And this creates a situation in the economy where the amount of money is going down and the velocity of money is actually going down as well. And if you're asking yourself, why is deflation so bad and how does all of this tie into it, make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video. Step number 3, I'm going to go over all of that and piece it all together for you. But we started with consumer debt. Now let's talk about government debt. Currently, our wonderful government is $23 trillion in debt. They just ticked over $23 trillion. That's the highest since World War II. And a lot of people that actually like debt, a lot of the Keynesian economists, they'll say, listen, we had this type of debt in World War II. We got out of it. It was no big deal. So anyone who's talking about the government debt is now just fear-mongering. The reason that is ridiculous is because the money government was spending in World War II was non-recurring, meaning we weren't going to be in a world war for the next 50, 100 years. We wouldn't have those expenses every single month. All of the debt that the United States has now, with the exception of some military spending, is recurring. Meaning we've got it this month, we're going to have it the next month, we're going to have it 3 years from now, we're going to have it 10 years from now. It's just the normal expenditures of the government. The interest that the government is paying right now in this $23 trillion in debt is $450 to $500 billion per year. That equals 10% of the overall budget of the United States government goes to paying just the interest on the debt. And the interest right now is at a historic low at near 2%. You can imagine what would happen if interest rates actually went up. That would take a bigger chunk of this overall budget, and that would mean less spending. Which brings me to my next topic, is all of this debt, whether it's on the government side or the consumer side, restricts future spending. And since it restricts future spending, it also restricts future growth. It's just like your own personal balance sheet. You have a set amount of income, let's say that's $50,000 a year, and you can only spread that so thin. You can only take on so many payments. And if the interest payment on your debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that means there's less money that you have to allocate to other types of spending. And this all goes back to what I said at step number 1. Since one person's spending is another person's income, the lower the spending we have because the debt is so high, the lower the actual income. Takes me over to demographics, which is their other argument. Right now we have baby boomers retiring. That's the biggest glut of population that we have in the United States. We'll throw up a graph to show you just how extensive this is. And throughout history, it's very well known that as people age and they retire, they spend a lot less money. Also, they pull money out of the stock market because they've had all of these assets in the 401ks and stocks and bonds. Now they need to pull that money out to actually live on. And that is exacerbated by ZIRP, zero interest rate policies. Over the past 10 years, the baby boomers haven't had the type of income coming in from their retirement savings because interest rates have been so low. So that's going to require them to spend even less and pull even more assets out of the market than they otherwise would have. Since we've got this big glut of population coming out of the economy, that reduces the labor force participation rate, which means fewer people are actually out there working, although the unemployment rate goes down. The unemployment rate is very tricky, and it can be very misleading because it includes this labor force participation. So we can have fewer people in the economy actually working as the unemployment rate goes down. This is going to decrease the velocity of money, and as that velocity spins at a slower rate, that again means there's less spending and less income. So more debt, less spending equals deflation. Why is that a problem? Let's go over to step 3 and answer that. A bonus reason why experts think deflation is unavoidable. And this is a little more advanced, so I'll try to keep it simple. We've got foreign USD debt, meaning other countries have debt issued in United States dollars. It's over 11 trillion right now. Why would governments do that? Because they get lower rates. So if they can borrow in dollars, the person lending them money doesn't have as much risk or perceived risk, so they can get lower interest rates, they can borrow more money, and they can buy more votes. Obviously, there's a huge problem with there being 11 trillion in this US dollar denominated debt. But another big problem comes when these governments try to roll over their debt that might be short term. Say it's 2-3 years. They roll that over. If interest rates go up, then the rate of interest that they pay on that new amount of debt that they need will increase. that means there's more demand for those dollars. The more demand there is for dollars, the value of that dollar goes up. Meaning that what we buy, what the United States buys, what it imports from other countries, the cost of those goods go down. And you may say, well, George, that's great. And I would agree with you. But the deflationists say, well, whoa, time out, wait a minute. If we have cheaper goods coming in and we import the majority of the goods that we consume, and 70% of our economy is consumer spending, if prices of these goods go down, that means deflation. Step number 3, and this is where we bring it all together, it's the deflation doom vortex. And I wish I was using hyperbole there. I'm actually not. Before we get into that, I want to make sure that you understand that deflation is good and bad. There can be good deflation and there can be bad deflation. Good deflation is when prices are going down because of productivity and technological advances, such as your iPhone or your cell phones being cheaper. When those cell phones first came out, they were probably $5,000. Now you can get one that does 1,000 times more for a lot less. Televisions, electronics, almost any type of electronic good would fall into this category. I'd like to point out that in the late 1800s, when the US economy grew by leaps and bounds, we actually had deflation in nominal terms, meaning prices were going down in the late 1800s. But adjusted for inflation, we had substantial GDP growth. In other words, although prices were going down, although we had deflation, people were actually getting richer because their purchasing power was increasing. And remember, in a time of deflation, your savings is actually increasing in purchasing power as well. So this type of deflation is actually really good because it increases sustainable, and I want to emphasize the word sustainable, demand. Bad deflation is when prices go down because there's less debt and credit in the system. This lowers the demand, which lowers velocity, that lowers spending, which, like we learned before, one man's spending is another's income. So since there's lower spending, there's lower income, and this creates this feedback loop that goes back here to lower demand, lower velocity, lower, and so on. So we know why experts say deflation is unavoidable: demographics and debt. But when you throw assets into the mix, that's when things get really, really bad. If we have assets going down, this also equals less spending, less income, now less jobs. So we have fewer jobs, this is less spending. We have less spending, we have less income. That means asset prices go down even further. So it adds to that negative feedback loop that was created through less government spending and less consumer spending. You can imagine this scenario where stock prices go down and home prices go down like they did in 2009, but for an extended period of time. Tax revenues would go down. So local governments would go bust, which means that pensions, the state pensions, would go bust. If those go bust, let's remember, that feeds into the doom vortex because that's less spending. Everything kind of feeds on one another. So government and consumers can't service their debt, which means they take out less debt. And remember, the economy is built on asset prices, debt, and confidence. So now we've got less debt, assets going down, and confidence being destroyed, which is less spending, which is less income. That makes the employment rate skyrocket, which puts us into the 1930s type of depression, but way worse because now the debt is far higher and the savings that we have is much less. And a lot of you may be thinking, well, that's no big deal because the Fed would come to the rescue, just like they did in 2009. But right now, rates are almost at zero. They've done QE infinity, which has just barely plugged the hole. And if you believe the CPI, it hasn't done much to inflation. Nothing that they can do will increase the debt, and that is the machine that drives the economy, just like we stated in step number 1. So if this machine breaks down, the amount of money in the system will decrease, the velocity will decrease, which will add fuel to the fire to our deflation doom vortex. Really what it means is the Fed would be completely out of ammunition. That turns the United States into Japan, where they've had 25 years of deflation, where the stock market and the housing market went down by well over 50% and has never, ever recovered. I want you to ask yourself right now, think about your 401k or your house. If it went down by over 50% and it never recovered. But not just you, think if it did that with every single American. Where do you think the economy would be? And that's why experts that say that this is unavoidable are extremely afraid about the future. Oh, but wait, there is more. If you want to find out why experts say inflation is unavoidable, check out this content right here, and I will see you on the next video.